Hemshik Samech Vav, page Kuf Ayin Zayin. Today is Kuf Zayin Tamuz, Tashin Samech Ches.
Right, so we saw the Moshel, the Oev Chayes HaNefesh, and the Chayes HaGuf, as a Moshel for Inyan HaOyer, which we moved on to the new field of Biur, Beneget to Oyer. Shehu Rach HaOrer Levad, Loi Etzem HaNefesh Klal. And we saw that the highest, which is Machaya the Guf, is Ha'orah from the Etzem HaNefesh, but it's not, and since that's the case, that it's Beklal not Inyan HaEtzem. And the Etzem HaNefesh ain't a begeder Hayes Lahachiyois. The very essence of the Nefesh is not in the whole concept, the whole definitional concept of Hayois Lahachiyois. You have to understand what we mean by the expression Hayois Lahachiyois. But for that it's mashma that there can be a Hayois which is not Lahachiyois. In other words, something can be Chai, but not necessarily in order to give Chayas to something, to give Chayas to something else. In other words, that something which is got in itself aliveness, in order that and that aliveness can carry that aliveness into another thing, well, that means that it must have a kiruv and a shayches to that other thing, in such a way that it can be mislabish, if we use the expression, it can enter and cause interaction between itself and the makabel, and that's what we call chayy, that's what we call life force. So that means that there's a power or a entity which we call here ha'orah, which enters all the pratim of the guf, all the koiches and the avorei guf, and it makes the guf alive. I will see it a little bit later in a moshel further down, that the guf actually lives mamish from the Chayes HaNefesh. So it's not just pushed by the Chayes HaNefesh, that it mamish live. In other words, that the Chayes Lahachiyois is a power that can be mahapecha, basically a doimim, basically what you might call a lifeless entity into a living entity. But in order to do that, then you have to have a certain closeness and ability to relate and, as it were, give what you have to give to that Dover HaMakabel Tachayus. Therefore, that's a form of leviticite, of livingness, which is, in order to translate that livingness, and the whole purpose of that livingness is to translate that livingness into something else. So he said the Etzem HaNefesh is not in that type of definitional entity at all. However, that's for sure that the Etzem HaNefesh is living. The Etzem HaNefesh is high. I could literally say that it's not high. It's just that it's high in such a way that it's not able to relate to the Avrei Guf and the Klei HaMakabel, which are in this case of the Guf. So that means that it must be high in a way which it's high in its own self, and not in a way that it's Makabel Chayes from something else. Because if it's Makabel Chayes from something else, then it's also a Makabel. And so then why would it not be Chayes Lahakes? Why isn't it able to give the Chayes directly further? And therefore we have to say that the Etzem HaNefesh is in effect high, is in effect a living entity, but it's a living entity in what you might say that it's at the beginning of what chai is, not that it actually is in a stage where it can give over chai to something else. In other words, it's not makabel and not noisein to anything. It's not makabel from any other madrega, and it's not noisein to any other madrega, but it's chai, and it's living in its own self. And that's what we call chai be'etem. For example, if we take in the koyches hanefesh, we find a similar dimion somewhat to that. If we take in the koyches hanefesh, and we find the koyach hachochma, for example. The koyach hachochma doesn't really come from anywhere. It doesn't receive its shefa and its, how do you call it, its chayes, or its oil, or whatever you like to call it, from any other level, nor it's the beginning of the whole revealed aspect of the neshama. And it kilo starts off the whole revealed koyches and the revealed aspect of the neshama in the group. That's called koyach hachochma. Like the Alter Rebbe is marich in Tanya, that I said is also Lamaila, the Sherish of the whole Chayes Pnimi is Dafkedine from Chochma. Come over in Kama Mekemis in Tanya without going into the whole Arichas here, and therefore Chochma is called an Atzmi. Chochma is called an Atzmi, or it's kilo, a Chai Bietem, because it doesn't receive from any other. Well, you might say, well, it does. It receives from the madregas in nefesh which are l'mayla from the koyches hagilui, but it doesn't receive from them in a direct way. And that's what we have the famous cloud in the pasuk in Iyov, that a chochma may ayin tima tei, that chochma is only to be found and to be in a state of metzias from an ayin, in a way where there's no recognizable kesher. So I mean the same thing with the etzem hanefesh. I mean the etzem hanefesh for sure lives from the Eibush. I mean that lifeness that there is in the etzem hanefesh, it's not just purely mitzad its own self. It's also from the Eibush, but it's in a hidden and not redeemed and revealed way, not only to itself, but a kosh came to Kalvachim to the Makablim. In other words, it's like a living entity all on its own, but that's a living, which is living in its own self for the time being, not yet in any way really giving over into the chayas haguf anything of its own self. Ayim kain, how does it machaya the guf? Well, that's the whole teretz. It's machaya the guf through the inyan of a ha'ora. In other words, it goes off from it a dover which is in no way really moisif or gorea or in any way shayak to its own etzem, and that's how it's machaya the guf. And that ha'ora does have an ability to make itself near and affect the evrei and koyches guf, and that's called chayes lahachiyoi. So that's the two inyanim those are the two gedorim that we're dealing with. The hine inyan chayes lahachiyoi is pashta. But that's already an expansion by way of his pashtas. The whole etzem of the etzem hanefesh is built in mispashet. Being as it is an etzem, it itself is not mispashet. Now, of course, it is mispashet, but it's not. It's mispashet in itself. Its own etzem is not mispashet, but it gives off his pashtas. Well, that's the ha'ora mimana. So you have to always be slightly careful that wasn't kol etzem bilti mispashet doesn't mean that it can't give off his pashtas from itself. What it means, etzem bilti mispashet, means that the very etzem itself doesn't go in the form of a derivation out of itself. It remains nakudati, to use the expression in modern Hebrew. It remains in the form of a nakuda atzmiyas. So therefore, he said that kol etzem bilti mispashet umamela eno b'chinas chayes la'achye uma shenimshech la'achye. That what is yer chayes la'achye is hu ha'ora leva ve'imi yesh sha'ha'ora hi lefi oifan ha'etem sha'etem hu chay umamela ha'ora hi b'chinas chayes la'achye. So he said that even though the truth of the matter is that just like we saw Lamaila, we call the Uyer Me'ein Hamoer, we used that expression, and we said that means that it carries with it certain essential characteristics that are important to us from the Moer, even though by no means the etzem hamoya, but that's the union of me'ein hamoya. So similarly in the nefesh, the ha'ora from the etzem is also me'ein, but we don't use that expression here. We don't want to say ad kedikah, because it's too directly related to use an expression me'ein. We say it's lefi oifan. In other words, just like the essential characteristic of the essential characteristic in this case of the etzem hanefesh is that it's high, so that inyan goes over in the ha'ora, but the ha'ora already translates it into a chai hachiyeh. How it is in the etzem, it's chai mitad atzmoi. That's what he is now. That's what he's now mamshich. That the hoyer is lefi oifan. In other words, it's according to the manner of the etzem, that the etzem hu chai umamera ha'ora hu b'chinas chayes la'achye. K'moi oyer v'ziv ha'shemesh she'etzem ha'shemesh hu behiro. As we saw earlier, that means that it's light. It's luminary. How do you call it? It's etzem illumination. Mamela hagilui hu oela ho'ir. K'moi came b'nefesh ye'liyei chai agilui va'ora memenu hu la'achiyeh. He said the ha'ora memenu is a ha'ora la'achiyeh. So that's the difference between what's brought in many places and also mentioned here briefly, chai be'etzem and chai la'achiyeh. So we need to be mispointed what is the union of this chai be'etzem? What do we mean? What kilo we need two like madregas like that in the nefesh? So we have one which is chai, but it's not chayes lahachiyes, but it's not the hepech of chayim. It's alive. It's a union for chayes. And then we have a ha'orim, which is mishachas el aguf. Which he calls chai be'etzem, and the truth of the matter is that chai be'etzem is not really the etzem haneshama. Whatever we call the etzem haneshama here, we're only using it in a borrowed sense, because the emissary etzem of the neshama is even beyond chai be'etzem. It's brought down in the famous Hemshech Samech Vav from the Rebbe in Nishmas Eden. It's brought down that the inyan from chai be'etzem, and also mentioned in that we got that of Shinches, that chai be'etzem is what we call etzem hanaran. It's not etzem haneshama mamish. It's the etzem of that part of the neshama which somehow or another relates to the good. Over the etzem of the etzem, the etzem haneshama, that's even l'mayla michai be'etzem, and that's what the Alter Rebbe in Tanya Perik Nun Aleph. Near the beginning, the Alter Rebbe is married that the shoma, etzem and neshama is a etzem ruchani poshut, where it's l'mayla mikol tziyu, and l'mayla mikol geder, and l'mayla mikol inin klalu. Klalu it's inin from pshitas, be'etzem k'mavua doret. It's a very difficult portion in the inin from Tanya. That's etzem. Chai be'etzem is already a lower giveaway in the nef. Of an intelligent reader, if he's intelligent or if he's bothered by these inyanim, would ask himself, why do we need chai be'etzem? Easy inyan yesh bazeh, that there should be something which is alive, and yet it doesn't really give anything of itself. Only by way of ha'ara does it give. It's chai in its own way. Muvdal, the chayes which is nimshut la'achiyes. So that's what we find. It's brought down over there in the Hemshech of Samech Gimel. The Rebbe brings down over there a very fascinating inyan. What yesh laharif binyan zeh of ein kana mochem laharif is I don't want to get too involved in certain inyan. It might be mashma me inyan zeh of Chafanim. He brings down over there that it's written by Yehoyada ben what was he called? Ben Abiniyahu ben Yehoyada. He was David HaMelech's personal what was his name? Advisor, I think he was. Or he was. Forgive me. He was one of David HaMelech's main advisors or close people. Beniyahu ben Yehoyada. That he's called Ish ben Ish Chai. Or that's the expression that, you know, the famous Ben Ish Chai, that's where he drew the term Ben Ish Chai. He's called a Ben Ish Chai. So I have to ask what do you mean he's a Ben Ish Chai? We should do this. So the Rebbe says that that's an Indian that we call him. Oh, so the Gemara says Masechta Brachos that Gedolim Tzadikim b'Misosom Yesem b'Chayeihem. That the Tzadikim are greater in the Kavyochel, whatever it means. The Misa Yesem Inyan b'Chayeihem. Und bringt dort in dem Portion immer Ben Ish Chai. שאפילו במיסוסום קרויים חיים. In other words, that the Gemara ties that expression Ben Ish Chai is the inyan from Chaim beyond the whole inyan from Chayes Lachis. Because in Chayes Lachis there's a hefsek. And we constatation that he's still alive after Misosai. But there's some meaning from Chai, Kruim Chaim afilu b'Misosam. That doesn't fit. So then we have to say that the Gemara ties that the inyan from Ben Ish Chai means a certain Chaim which is beyond Chaim. If it's Chaim, but it's beyond the normal inyan of Chaim, and that we could suggest that that's the inyan of Nitzchius HaNefesh, or Amitius inyan HaNefesh, which is beyond the inyan of Shinuim and Zman, V'mokim, V'ka'itzav. And that's what we find Lamaila, that we find the two expressions, did you say at the end of Yishtabach, you say, Baruch you say, Melech Yochid, Chei Hoi, Hei Lomen. However, on Shabbos before Baruch Shoma, you say Ba'aderes Muna L'chai Oilomim. You don't say Chai Oilomim nor Chai Oilomim. So put down in Sifrei HaPnimiyim, Sifrei HaKabbalah V'Achsidus, that the difference is that Chai Metatzili means that it's dovuk to something, it's giving life to something. That's already the unit from Chai Oilomim, now it's already shot to the Oilomim. Kaviyol, the level where now it's already going down to. However, Chai Oilomim, that's referring to the Eibush himself. He's Chai Oilomim. He just lives, as we saw here in the Hemshech, Ein Loi Tchila Ve'Ein Loi Tichla. Amamel, if he said, that the word Chai B'Patach is a much greater idea. Chai Oilomim. A state after them, the Lashon in Sifrei HaChsidus, Chai V'Loi B'Chayim. Das ist Chai, aber es ist nicht B'Chayim. Es steht auf der Aseive. Auf der Aseive, ist Chai, aber nicht B'Chayim. Or Chai HaChayim. In Perik Nun, the Alter Rebbe was a lotion over there. Chai HaChayim. Amamela, Lafize, Nimtza, that there's a Yin for Chai, and there's a Chayim which is Nimshach Mizeh. Aber Chai, aber nicht B'Chayim. Pirush, it's Chai, but it's not to do with the normal Yin of Chayim. Amamela, that's what the Gemara means, that there's fine and there's also tzadikim, she'afilu b'misosim, kruyim chayim, they're ben ish chay, or that's what they mean, there's a inan in the mensch, or there's a chay be'etzem, was a nish chay, it's not chay to chayim al derech harod. I wish you to have the im came, might have there been ish rogil, a tzadik, or ish rogil also got that in it. The have there is that the tzadik is azar, that he brings at that Chai Be'etim, even though Einu Chayes Lahachi Yes, but das ist Begoli Etzloi. And if even B'Misose, klappt bei ihm, a gewisse Inne, what das heißt, Chai Be'etim. Aber mir Juvan, Lefi Zeh, or Lechoira Yesh Mokim, Le'ir, the Tainen of the Mishachistim was a Tainen, that there can be as Amatzias, Chai, V'lei B'Chayim, in Eino Chanam, nicht al derech harovi, aber Chai, Am Yishleb. And that's what the Gemara says, Gedolim Tzadikim, Chai, Ish Chai Be'etem. Well, this steht dort in Samech Vav, the Rebbe Taisus. And I'm going to say that there's a inyan in the Nefesh, which is chai. It's chai, it's alive, but it's not chayim. Chai v'lev chayim, picked us even the Rabbeinu. And it's there, but it doesn't really have to do anything. Because there is a possibility to reach it. There's certain people where they bring, as it were, a hashra or eizishu hamshaka in that inyan where it's miskala etlam and clapped in there, as you might say. Dofek etlam inyan ze. Oh, but that's not chai lachiyas. Chai lachiyas, mamish lachiyas is a group of an andere man. En dan geven ze effect de geweldige kashi. It's not a kasha, but a shayra, but they're a chakira. What's the etzim? What do you need in the etzim? What's the, they're pregnant out of it. The altar, the etzim, the etzim ruchni poshut, shalomayla mikol tziyu, mikol inim, that's even lomayla michai be'etzim. The Rebbe Nishmas Yain, he says chai be'etzim is very, lefiyarach, in very comments, low moderator. That's also, we should. So I got certain ideas about it. I ain't kind of mocking. The Lahari was not really shy to the etzem shia. Aber ich lebe mal, the Enya for etzem and everything. The etzem was the door. Etzem ruchni. Dort shy to lahoyer as oiram. That's an andere Enya. It's nicht lahachi is as oiram, nor viel to lahoyer as oiram, by even light and darkness. Aber ner avaye nishmas odam. But there's a inyan, there's a etzem inyan that floats around in the world, and it's called the etzem nefesh. And that lights up the world in a way for a ne'er achmi, but if it only lights, it just pushes everything before it. But even what the Alter Rebbe says in Perikov Tes, that the oyer doiches ha-choyshe b'derech mamera. Har be'oyer nidche b'derech mamera har b'choyshe. Nidche b'derech mamera mi'ato. And that's in from the etzem nishoma. When a yid walks around, and the Mittler says in a place that when a yid walks around, he's mavarer alidei yechida, which is not after maluvish begufa. There's a gefinze bedared amas. Tutuf allem in sotinyanim in the world. He hasn't got the faintest idea what it is or what he did or what he achieved. Just the fact that he walked down Rechoiv Ploini, does a dukit all sorts of inyanim. This is the etzem and every high even and this that just has to be there, and that's so immense that like it's written that oil brings all sorts of little things to it. And when you put oil, all sorts of little things get attracted to it. So what is oil achmi, which I have an oil v'choisha, come over, that just brings all sorts of things. All sorts of amazing inyanim. Same kind of from Lahari because we're already finished already. Yidden have been drained around in the world and half. Is a matter taken from me out now. We have to have the gilly from El Chodosh, Al Tzion Toya. That's a completely new house. Came on the Shkivem. Anyway, well, not anyway, but yes. So, whatever said the Rebbe, does he in from Chai Be'etzem, also, could they say Chai Be'etzem is Etzem Ar Naran, or the side to the goof, but it's not Machaya the goof, that has to be there, because that's the kilo, the Kudas Anitzkes, as you might say, in the middle. Does the Inni was, I feel like Gabi Shari in Yono, and I feel like Gabi Goof, with a Koichaisov, this is a Inni, but halt in him, the Amitis in him from Leviticai, the Emerson Inni, and a tzaddik is a mensch, what he lives with that, he brought that down into the kilo, and if he just, I take him off, I said, I feel about misos and nikroim chayim. Anyway, let's learn for a bit. Every Indian, you have to sort of be choik of a deirosh a bitl. You have to sort of find out as it fit in. That's what I want to train you guys. You have to sort of, what we're learning is anyway just very, very compared to the real pirush of these inyan. Well, Chopanim would say Indian to always sort of try and sort out, how does this fit and how does it relate to the other Indian Akayitzah Bezeh. Ulazois, therefore said the Rebbe, where are we? If שהאורה היא לפי אופן העצם, שהעצם הוא חי, אומר האורה הוא בחינס חייס לאחריס, כמו יהיה וזיר השמש היא בהירה, כמו כן בנפש, ליוסי חי, meaning חי בעצם, הגילוי והאורה ממנו הוא לאחיי. ולזיס, אנו יודעים מהאורה es מציאס העצם, since the ha'ora is megala at least the union of the high, the fact that the etzem high be'etzem is high, and the ha'ora is high as lahachiyos, and therefore from the ha'ora we can know about what you might call the mokke or the etzem from which that's nimshach, and therefore we know that the metzius ha'etzem Bainu, mizeh שהאורה היא חייס להחייס, אני יודעים שהנפש הוא חי בעצם, ולא שהוא חי מאיזה דבר. In other words, when you read the first part of that sentence, you might think that what he's trying to say is that from the ha'ora we know that it must come from somewhere. Therefore, we know the metzias of the moya, as you might call them, metzias of the chai be'etzem. So he says that's not the pshat. We know more than that. We know not only just the metzias, v'hainu, he touches out. What do we know the metzias? Yeah, from the fact that the ha'ora is chayes lahakiyes, then we can learn from that, and we can know shanefesh hu chai be'etzem, and lo shu chai me'ezeh dova. Because if it itself was chai me'ezeh dova, it wouldn't be able to be chai, it wouldn't be able to give off chayes to something else. But here we learn another point, that in order to give off chayas, to be machayas something else, you have to be chay be'etzem. And the fact that we are able to tell from the chayas lahachis, the metzias, not just that it's there, but we're able to say, oh, that's a sign that the inyan is chay, that the nefesh be'etzem is chay be'etzem. I see that it gives off chayas lahachis, but that means it must itself be chay be'etzem. In other words, that if you are a makabel from something else, you're totally b'mashu acher, you're not able to be machaya something else. And therefore, the fact that we see that nefesh gives off a chayas to be machaya the guf and all the koiches, from that we can deduct that it must be chay be'etzem. Now that's another move forward in the argument. And don't learn that sentence as just referring only to the fact that we know the metzias, because that's clear that any ha'ora tells me the metzias of the moya or the shurs from the ha'ora. But the Rebbe is saying more. Hainu. Not just we know the metzias, but we know the oifen of the metzias, and we know essentially nyonim in the metzias, the hainu, that it's chai, and not only it's chai, but it's chai be'etzem, because otherwise it wouldn't have the ability to be Meshader, to give off the in of Chayes Lachiyah. Therefore we come to know, and that's very important, because that's a difference in the Moshel Gabi the Nimshal. Because Lamaila, that's what we said that the Avsha gives off. For now we can't learn, all we can know is that there is a Atzmus from whence is Nimshal the Oyer. But the Oyer doesn't really teach us anything about the Atzmus. The truth is, it teaches us certain very, very, very distant inyonim, as we'll see when we come to these inyonim, we can't really know anything about the Atzmus from the Or. We just know the metzias of the Atzmus. In the Nefesh, it's not like that. Since the Nefesh is already Ainim, which is high, and it's got a certain yachas to the mensch, I feel that the pshitas of the Etzem, it's got a certain yachas to the mensch, and therefore we can learn essential inyonim beneged to the Etzem. Even though, be careful, we can't learn the Mahus Hayetzem, because we don't even know anything about the Mahus Ha'ora. The truth is, Mahus, what is the Mahus of the Nefesh? That we don't really know. All we know, we're all talking about in Yonim, what's called in Siddur HaSogos Sameh Machiyas built up.
How can anything be Chai without having something giving it, without having Hashem giving Chai, without having something giving it?
Well, that's what I say. The Nefesh is Mekabel. Sicher the Nefesh is Mekabel. Pinkt ze wie Chochma is Mekabel von Chochmas Timor. Aber es ist nicht Mekabel bei even Arogir. The Nefesh just plinks it out. The Nefesh takes a stick chayas and puts it there by even Helom. Sicher's mekabel from the Eibster. Nothing is alive without the Eibster. But the whole Seder is in Guf. Well, that's in from Chai Bet. So he said, I have Shodi, and so he brings a dogma. Here's a very fascinating thing. He said, take for example the Guf. The Guf is alive. He said, you shouldn't learn that the Guf is just like a Lavush, and there's a Dova Achai inside the Lavush, and it's pushing the Guf to be moving in Levadi Kazak. They call it like they use the old joking martial, the Punch and Judy show. You had these things that moved around, or it was just the fingers of a guy or somebody that with strings on this moving them. They're not really moving with tzadachmo. So that's what you might think. You might think that the Guf is just a doimim, and there's something inside it which is called the nefesh, and it pushes the Guf to do what it wants it to do. So the Rebbe says it's not a pshat. Those are ador kiim aguf atzmei chai. The truth of the matter is, and that's what we call in Sudas the yichud nefesh aguf. In other words, that the yichud, the yishachtas of the nefesh with the guf is so complete, what you might call so atzmius and so immense, that the guf itself lives from the nefesh. In other words, the guf, all the ta'im of the guf become alive. Not that the guf is essentially a doimim, and the guf pushes him. I'm sorry, the nefesh pushes him, but the guf actually becomes alive from the nefesh. In other words, that the nefesh's effect on the guf is so profound that he's mahapach a doimim to a chai. He makes the guf a levati kazak. Means the guf's actually alive. That's why it does the debut in Siddur become a mekaymes, that it's not a taich that the guf is be'etem doimim. He is. When is the guf a doimim b'li anefesh? And that's what we see. That the actual guf was offer. That they used to breathe into it, and that's mahapit, that the whole offer becomes levity. When is it offer? Rachmanin Niklan. Oiv the nefesh withdraws altogether. Oiv the nefesh is mistalich. Hashem mishmareinu. Oyemot is the guf returns to the, and that's what it's offer. Ato v'yela offer toshu. Because Moshe is coming any moment. That was a famous scene what the Baal Shem Tov said. You know the Maas. But the Baal Shem Tov said that he could have gone up into Gan Eden Pink to see Eliyahu. Ain't no Bayayim said. He wanted to be Mekayim offer Toshu. He called the Torah Kisot offer. He wanted to be Mekayim. Yeah, the Ishba said, be Omak Ein Lahari Peseh. We see that there is an Indian of Toshu Vela offer, but that's only Belia Nefesh. According that the Nefesh is in the guf is alive. Ava, Al Mikol Mokim, Arechai Shaloi, who rak mitzadana, Shoma Loisha, who chai bi etem. Nonetheless, the guf only lives from the neshama. That's true that the guf pushes the nefesh pushes the guf and turns him into a levati gazak. But not that you would say that the guf is chai be'etem. And what's it the raya? Ulazois ain't be choil saguf lahachi is dovo. Therefore, your body can't be machaya something else. But nefesh haora mi itoi uchayes lahachi is. Over the nefesh, what a haora from him is yechayes lahachi is. So mipnei nefesh uchay be'etem. In other words, we learn now a whole new union in the musik, chai be'etem, that where a thing is chai be'etem, then it's got the ability, and it does. Machaya a zweite Sache, but not directly. It's not that it itself actually is machaya, but its ha'ora is machaya the other Sache. Oh, but that's because it's a atzmi, it's like we said, it's a shtik chai which came directly from Ja, Mokke Kolachheim, what is it there? The Rebester, and it's Chai Be'etzem Minyonai, and the fight can be, aber the Guf is the Levity gesagt, the Guf left, aber the Guf can't be Machaya a Zweite, because the Guf itself is a Makaber, from another thing, which is Chai Slahach, which is in itself a hour from the Chai Be'etzem. Mamila, it's familiar.
Can the goof give forward? Can the goof give birth to another baby?
That's what we're going to see in a second. Exactly, the Rebbe touches that one in a moment. That's another reason. That's not the chayes of the goof, but that's what we call Amshach Atzmi. So much worse. Oh, the Rebbe's going to immediately, he's going to touch on that. Yeah, Neisha Nefesh Hu Chai B'Yetzer. Ula Meile. Oh, so jetzt fragt der Rebbe gewaltige Kash. Ula Meile, a chayes Mibchinas HaKeilim. Eile Meile, where does the chayes come from? It comes from Atzilus. Of in Atzilus Guf, it comes from the Keilim. I brought down in Tanya in Kunze Sachrin, right near the end of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings us. Ukiyadua the Keilim, the Zun, Nasim Naran Lebi'ah. It's well known that what is Keilim and Atzilus, so that becomes where V'chayis, that becomes what you might call Neshama in Biyah. In other words, that the Etzem Chayas of Olam HaBriya is from the Keilim of Atzilus. And that's what he brings over to the Alter Rebbe. It's brought down to Kisvei Arizal that the Lamed Keilim of Malchus to Atzilus, Boikim Esapalse, V'nasim Neshama B'Olam HaBriya. In other words, what happens is that what is Keilim in Atzilus breaks through the Helam of Malchus, and then the Keilim, instead of being Keilim, they become Oyer. The Keilim HaNefach, they become the Chayes and the Neshama in Olam HaBriya. Remember, the Akasha we just said that the Guf can't be Mechayes something else. And it's well known that the Keilim, they are Bedugmas HaGuf L'mayla. As a Portan we say every Friday, Gufin Tchinas Loin, that you fixed Gufim for the spheres, and what are they? They are the Keilim, remember? The Keilim of B'chinas Gufim. So the Rebbe asked, we just said the Guf can't be Mechayeh, and I think it's only Makabel. The Keilim are Makabel from where? And they're like Gufim L'gabi Di'er. And then we say, oh no, the Keilim goes from Malchus to Atzilus, and they become where? They are Mechayeh the whole element. No, they're Mechayeh something else. They're Mechayeh the whole Bria Yetzirah V'yah. I see the Chakasha. How does that fit in? Because they're the Indian from Guf. So he said, that's an normal. He said, because the Keilim are mamish elakus, lochein heim b'chinas chayis. Therefore they can be, even chay be'etzem. There got to be something. There got to be something else. In other words, that's what the famous beer when I get to Atzilus is that everything in Atzilus is Elakus. I feel that the Keilim are also mamish Elakus, not just the earth. But the Keilim are also Elakus. No, the Keilim, what their Gilu is from the Rashimo, not from the Kav. Therefore, they're under even of the Iskalas of Elakus. Not the Inim from Shemban compared to the Inim from Ma'am, all Arich Sainin. That there is Bezeh in it. Also, of course, they are Elakus. If they're Elakus, then they can be Machaye, something else. It doesn't really matter what way the Eivishter does it. As you might say, how he dresses up the Eivishter. Of course, he's Elakus. Elakus is Machaye anything, any old way. In other words, you name it, Elakus has it. That's a terror. The difference is that the Keilim L'mayla, they're mamish Elakus. Your Guf, they say, in my time, it's put down and says the Guf is mamish Elakus. Yeah, well, it is. But it's tremendously behilim. You got to be very careful that you shouldn't trip over your Guf, as you might say. And therefore, you have to be very careful. It's all behilim. Then certain tremendous inyonim will be miskal in the Guf. What it'll be miskal how the Guf is really a gil eloki in a very high oifen. Well, le'isato, as you might say, it's only the Guf. Adafa, says the Rebbe, that's not a kash. Ukamoike, v'hainu l'fisha keinim heim elokus ma, v'loch hein heim etcha. Ukamoike, Ono yodim me'ha'oras ha'nefesh be'eze madrega u ha'nefesh. There's a further point now. Not only we know that the nefesh is be'etzem chai, we can know lefi even ha'etzem from the ha'ora in the relationship of guf and nefesh. We can know another inyan. We can know even more about that etzem, that chai be'etzem. We can know even more things about it. Not just that it's chai, but we can know it's madrega. Ya'anu yodim me'ha'oras ha'nefesh be'eze madrega u ha'nefesh. Ukemoi, im shoyer shoy mebchinas achsodim, oy mebchinas ha'gevuleis. Ukemoi bei Shammai u bei Silo. But that's what the Alter brings in the Akdama to the Tanya. You guys are familiar with the famous shtickle near the end of the Akdama to the Tanya. But the Alter brings it. The reason why the Bei Shammai were Mahmirim, Bei Silo were always Neitel Lakula was because the Neshamis were from the Indian from Gvulis and from the Indian from Chatzadim. The Bei Silo was from Chatzadim and Bei Shammai was from the Gvulis. What does he do? Is that from certain Giluim, since Bei Shammai were always, they were Neshamas Begufim. Bei Shammai was Yidden, they were Neshamas Begufim. Since their Natia was in a certain way always, in Giluim, Gilui HaNefesh, albeit an important Giluim when they get to Torah and so on, they were always noted to be Machmir. Well, that's a sign that their Neshamas, from that Gilu, you can know that their Neshamas were Be'etem, were from the Inana HaGvules, and since Beis Hillel were always noted to the Inana Lahatir, or Lahokel, Lafirach. I mean, there were Chumrei Beis Hillel, Kulei Beis Shammai, but that's another Inana, that's indicative of what we call the Iskalos in the Sfiras. That's only in Inyonim Siyomim, of a Bederachlau, Beis Shammai, Machmirim, Beis Hillel, Amamire, says the Rebbe, we can know that from the Giluim. I can see from the way they deal with Inyonim in Torah, and they paskin what is Inyonim mitzad etzem hanefesh shelahem. So that's another. So we need to understand what does that mean. Just to finish off the Inyan, in a similar way, im mibchinas moichin oi midas. In other words, we can know certainly, but that tells us that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were be'etzem. They were more shy to the Midas Elyonis than they were to the Moichin. In other words, not Cholila that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel didn't have Gilui HaMoichin. We mean that their Natia was more to the Etzeminian of the Psak, and that Psak was all Mitzad Zeh or Mitzad Gvuris or Mitzad Be'ila. There were certain people that their Indian was more the Etzeminian of the they are Sogi in Torah. It's Midiyas Ha'inyanim, which was Choybek, Petoichle, Halbe, Dvarim, not so much Yetzim, Chroa, Elapoyo. For example, what Moshe Rabbeinu is even Chokmah. Ta'afila is even Chokmah, is how everything is in it. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Me'ayin li bo. So when it was all time, what are you going to do with the people? And are you going to feed them? But Moshe Rabbeinu said, he's not charged to all those Inyanim. He's in the Avdollah von Moichin, that's in van Abdullah, okay, do it. I feel like Gabi Dibo, he had to have Aaron. Aaron had to be the one that assisted him. Hu yeh Nivi, Atatiel Olelakim, Hu yeh Nivi Achor, as they state. Rashi tells us that Novi is from Loshen Niv Sasayu. They touch Rashi though. The inyan van Niv, the inyan van Dibo, the inyan van movement of the lips, is called Niv, Niv's Sasayu. Actually, if a Novi is a mention, he talks, but he talks in Yonim which are given into him, not a Nisharet eigene Sachen, Cholila. He's not talking his own thing. He's talking the Abises in Yonim. He's getting himself vercheppet mit der Tzitzes dort. Even zelf in zijn huis. Good night. But that means that's limit haskell, had ik al Musa haskell, en we darf allemaal op tzitzes. Darf allemaal geen tzitzes, open tzitzes. It's an amazing thing. There's a sefer from the Sefer Charedim. He was, El Torah brings him in Tanya, Periklamet Bay, so that's the heart of Tanya. He was the Arizal's shaman. He was the shaman in the Arizal Shul of Charedim. You guys heard of the Charedim? Philip Place. It's, he was called the Rabbeinu Elazar Azkari, Charedim. It's, and he wrote the Sefer where he deals with all the mitzvahs of the Torah, how they connect with all the different Eivorim, all the Tareach mitzvahs, and which Eiva they're connected with, so you'll be able to know that if you use this and this Eiva, you can be Mekayim, and you can through that Eiva, you can Mekayim all the different mitzvahs. But he was a famous Sefer. He was the one that the Arizal danced with in the middle of the circle. You know, the ganze Maas was the Arizal, the Rashbi. You know the whole Maas was. How can I tell you all these Maas in the middle of the year and so forth? It's a famous Maas, you remember the Charedim. Anyway, he was a very heilige mensch. Go apelatik Zakiven. So he's got the Sefer Charedim. It's an amazing thing. If you read the Sefer Charedim, he's got a short Akdoma where he writes about the Bitkat of the Golas, and we have to bring Moshiach every second. But they wrapped it. Can't hold out the Golas anymore. It's just absolutely impossible. Muzay the Guru Shlema. That was how many years ago? Over 400, probably closer to 500 than 400 years ago. And then immediately, even before, and then later on he writes all the different conditions for the mitzvahs, different things you have to do and have in order to be able to make the mitzvah. And then he writes all the mitzvahs. In between that and that, he's got a whole thing which he calls mitzvahs tzitzis. It's amazing thing. He's got in here for mitzvahs tzitzis. A whole big piece in the middle, doesn't seem to fit anywhere. And he says mitzvahs tzitzis, regardless of the tzitzis, they represent the klolus of mitzvahs ki yadua. The mitzvah tzitzis, that is the key to it. He writes a baricha with all sorts of medrashim, biurim, it's a pretty place for the zah. He said, if you have mitzvah tzitzis on the whole time, that is the key, and that is the indoctrination term. You have all the mitzvahs of Hashem, and you have ideas of mitzvahs, and you have discussions about mitzvahs, you have the mitzvahs b'poyo, you have the mitzvahs b'seidom. Just by wearing a telescope, not just taking it off any old time and putting it back on any old time, but wearing a telescope. They stay tight. Sometimes trying to get you guys excited. It's a little bit of a hard job. But anyway, that's the Sefer Charedim. So we get, I don't know where we were now. Anyway, we get back to the Mars. Oh yeah, he got caught up with his tzitzis. Vainu, the fish akelim elakus. I know what we're talking about. So Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, either mibchinas hamoichin or mibchinas hamid. Yeah, and the Rashbi, he was also from the Moichin. He was a very high madrega. He came over, became that doesn't mean that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were from a low madrega. It means that their Inyan was more poyo mamish. They're like the Mishnah compared to all the Inyanim from Torah Shabbat Pech. Koidem the Inyan Mishnah, and even like Gabi the Gemara, the Inyan from the Mishnah is like the Midas, it's like the Etzem Tak, the Inyanim, or Kosher, or Posel, or that's either Gvura, or Chesed, or Chulu. Kedush, Oilam HaYitzira, the Inyan from the Mishnah, that's Inyan Midas. Therefore, that's the Nishon. So I come to know, even Inyan in the through the Ha'orah, I can see the. Now what does that mean? Well, that's a sign that the Inyan from Chai Be'etzem is not Mamish Etzem and Nishoma Gur and the Hoicha Madreya. About the Etzem and Nishoma Be'etzem Minyona, it's hard to say from Gruz or from the Sodim. Well, that's a sign that we're talking about Etzem Legabi da Ha'orah. And that's what we call Chai Be'etzem. But we're not Etzem Shebe'etzem. And therefore, from the Ha'orah, I can know about the Etzem Al-Choponim relatively Etzem, the Hainu Chai Be'etzem. I can know from what madrega kill, it's nimshak lamaila, and mamila, what is the tafkid almost of that particular person, and what's his inyan, and what do you have to be mechavan him to do. I can know from the ha'orah. The whole zeh eshelei damiyaha orah. You go over the Abahainu, Lavishihi Gila Etzem, Shemi'ain Ha'etzem. Now here the Rebbe does use the expression Mi'ain Ha'etzem. In other words, that Me'ain, in the sense that we can come to know all sorts of important things, but not to confuse the Mi'ain here with the Mi'ain out is Lamaila, as we pointed out before. It's only ha'ora she'ein bo min ha'etzem klal. That ha'ora doesn't really have in itself the etzem of the chai be'etzem. It's only a ha'ora bilvad mimenu. Ulazois ma she'onu yoidim me'ha'ora hu rak metzias ha'etzem. And therefore the truth of the matter is we only know the metzias of the etzem, like I pointed out before. Avol mahus etzem in nishoma einanu yoidim klal me'ha'ora. In other words, even chai be'etzem we don't know. How much more so mamish etzem mahus nishoma? We don't know. In other words, we can know all sorts of important things. We can know if it's chesed gvura, we can know if it's moichin, we can know all sorts of inyan. But mamish mahus, that we don't know, because all those inyanim hanal are all shayt to what we call matzias. They're all shayt to the agdora, how things are, but matzias are ha'olam, matzias aguf, matzias afila pulas ha'odam, giluya b'toich ha'olam. Our mamish mahus, the etzem mahu of the neshama, even the truth of the matter is in the ha'ora we don't know mahus. How much more so in the mahus itself we don't know the mahus. I won't be called market. No, wait, my dad my cheers etzem al mahus etzem neshama ain't only yodim klal me'ora. So lefi ishu ha'ora le bad ve'ein bo min etzem klal. In other words, that the chai be'etzem just remains completely moved out from the chayes la achiyah. V'lochein ein ha'ora poyer a shinui klal be'etzem. It therefore doesn't cause any change in the etzem, meaning in the chai be'etzem. She'ein nogeh klal im nimshechas ha'ora u'meir al ha'achiyos im loy. Aleph lam means im loy. Whether it's Maya and it actually brings the Chayes Lahachiyos to the Makabel, which are the Evrei Aguf, Imloy, or whether or not. Ain't Nogeya. It doesn't really matter to the Chai Be'etzem. Shagam Kishaloi Nimshechas Ha'oros HaNefesh ain't ze Shum Giroyen Ba'Nefesh or Ba'Nefesh. Ukemoi, so here we see an interesting thing now. That's not a giroin in the etzema, Now, like we saw Gam Lamaila, we pointed out yesterday that we sort of talk both in the positive and the negative. We talk about how the ha'ora is not a moish, if anything, and doesn't give anything to the etzem. And we also use the expression back the other way. It's not goreya. If it's not meir, then it's not goreya anything from the etzem. So here we're saying lamata a similar inyan, and here it's a little bit more shayach to apply that in a way, because we saw that lamaila the kavanah was to negate the possibility of something not functioning, and when it gradually loses its ability to function. So therefore, that's not shayach lamaila. Also here in the nefesh, as far as the chai be'etzem is concerned, whether it gives off the ha'ora, whether it doesn't, or if it's not effective in giving off that ha'ora, let's say it gives it doesn't really get anywhere, that doesn't in any way cause any what you might call halishas or lack of ability in the chai be'etzem. It's not a negation, or how do you call it, cancellation of anything in the nefesh. Now he brings this lashon from the Rambam. Now this lashon is actually written in the Moira Navukim of places. Kol chai misnaneya. There's a cloud that everything which is alive moves. Kol chai misnaneya. In other words, everything which is alive lives. That reminds me, famous Maaseh, the Baal Shem Tov Tzitzis. You don't know the Maaseh? It's put down in Tzitzis. It's put down in Drushik Tzitzis. The Baal Shem Tov Tzitzis, even if he stood still, mamish, they used to move. They used to jump. These tzitzis. So brought down the Baal Shem Tov, he was able to be poor. the etzem, the chai be'etzem, from which his tzitzis were in other words, in the Aor Elokis, which is Shat Mitzvahs, that would be mamish inside. And so even when there wasn't any necessity for them to move, when we needed the hisnanaya, nonetheless they were moving. The whole story that he once went to the Omid or something. We get this. How did they find out about it? Some things. That he came over to group in, they asked him to go to the Omid, and in the end he did go to the Omid. And they noticed. They noticed. He used to stand Subha Shemanes, I think it was the deal. But Shemanes used to be like a Evan Demon. Nonetheless, the tzitzis were shuffling like as if he would have been. The tzitzis were going back and forth. He was standing there, absolutely motionless. That's when they picked it up. Yeah. They actually found it out through a match. I was put down in Jewish Exodus. So Amiti over Pili. Auch upon him, Chai Mishnah, Chai Mishnah Neya. As he said the Rambam, anything which is alive, how can you tell if it's alive? Because it moves. So the Rebbe teaches now that that's a Hoish La'inyan. Now Rebbeim, anything the Rambam said, you should realize that they took it very, very serious. Anything the Rambam gesagt is not just, a description of something, it's a Inin Sheish B'zeh Ad Tzod. So therefore, what is that? Ko Chai Misnaneya. Something which is Chai BMS gives off a koyach which makes things move. That's the touch, including itself. So he says, Hare, Gam Bilti Tnua Hu Chai. The pshat in that is that not that the tnua makes him alive. No, because he's alive, he moves. So he said, but if let's say he wouldn't move, does that would make him alive? No. Can you get the point? It's an amazing use of swara. What I was saying is not the result makes the cause, but the cause makes the result. Not because the thing moves, therefore it's high. Because it's high, therefore it causes things to move. Got the idea? No, it's like the old. So, if we got into that story, then we'd really get off the track. He said, the truth is that he moved out the tnua who high. The Inin shemisnaneya ubchinas tnuas hachayus. Hainu is pashtus hachayus lachye. He said that moving is not the chay or is mitzadetzim definition chay. No, because he's chay, therefore he gives off for himself a aura which makes him shockle or appear to shockle and makes other things also shockle. But not that that's the Indian of Chai. Chai is Chai because he's Chai and Etzem to go even. And it goes off for him as an Indian, which is a noticeable and Leviticus Zah called Tnua. Arigam Dutit Tnua. Avayne is Pashtus Achayat Lachye. Arigam im Eina Misnaneya is Pasheit Mikom Ochim Chai Isn't that amazing? I mean, I'll tell you that first one said in the Rambam, called Chai Misnaneya, and his life is a man. Can't understand what are the ties. Nishat the Misnaneya make him high. No, because he's high the far, but they're Mamela, they're Misnaneya. And if I could believe Misnaneya, he's high. Very well. And Mamela, he said that's the Indian. Gamim ena Misnaneya Mishpasha Miko Mochim Hu Chai Be. He said the same thing. So that leads us to a further union. Komt uit, Levite, that the Chai Be'etem, the Etem Moker, doesn't really need the Chayas at all to be what it is. What that's indicating to us, that ultimately there's a Havdalah between the Chai Be'etem and the Chayas Lahachis. There's really a tremendous Havdalah between them. It's just that it goes in or even from the Derab Mamela, the Chayas is Nimshel B'derab Mamela. But not that in any way the Chai Be'etzem is really bound up and a must have, or in any way kosher be'emes with that Chai which is Nimshel Mimena. I mean kosher in the sense that the Chayas Lahachiyas can't be Chayas Lahachiyas, there's no dovuk in the in the Chai Be'etzem. Oh, that Dveikes, it speaks as if the Mishnah Neah doesn't establish me the Chai. The Chai makes me the Mishnah. In the same way, not that the Chai Be'etzem needs the Chayes Lahaki, or that in any way gives him anything, or in any way proves him, or makes him what he is. No, the Chayes Lahaki has to have him, but not that he has to have the Chayes Lahaki. That's what he said. Come on, Cain. כשנים שחייס אינם מתויסף על ידי זה דור בעצמה. Here's your kasha. What is named Rafuel. משהו כוסו זוכו נקבה ברום ויבורך oisom. It's written that the Abishah created Zochar Nekeva, and he gave him a bracha. Umavua, that's written in another place. Shazo shelatzedach hashpoa neteisef oya biyama shpia. Ukemei ba'atorah she'itroloi imoi. Zo b'chinas hashpoa. I'm sorry, ba'atorah she'itroloi imoi chulu. That's a kasha. Zo b'chinas hashpoa atzmi is already the teretz. Aval. So what does he mean? It's written that how do you call it? The Adam and Chava, they had to have a bracha from the Meibishter. Vayevorach Oisom Elokim, Vayim Alehem Pru'uravu. So Pru'uravu means that they gave off chayes to something else. They wouldn't have been able to do that by stays if not by Yevorech Oisom Elokim. So from that it would appear that the nefesh is not a chai be'etzem, and no, on the contrary, it needs a special interference from the Eibishter, and it needs a toisefes betuich ha'etzem kedei lashpir chayes to the mekablim. And we're just saying that no, the chai be'etzem just automatically gives aim as a call yachas amiti al chayes lahachia. It doesn't need any additional any tosefes or anything in order to give off the chayes. And here would appear without a bracha from the Meibishter, then it wouldn't have been able to give off chayes. So what is the teretz? Obvious, almost obvious. It's not obvious, cholila, but it's, the teretz is mitbakesh. That what is the teretz? That's talking about another inin in chayes. That's not talking about being machaya yourself. That's talking about giving birth to another entity. You're bringing a whole new entity into the world. So once again, it's the same old closed kashia that you don't really bring the entity into the world where the Eibishter does. Yeah, Ovasokosov, the Gemara says Masecta neither the mother and the father are shutafim with the Eibishter. There's a simon that the way the Eibishter made it is that without the avoim, then it's not going to be the valad. The Eibishter is what gives the whole thing the possibility to help. But without the Adam, without the Alva'ain, it's Ein Inin Shel Vlad, Ein Inin Shel Hilod. That's another Inyan. That's an Inyan Achmi that Kedei, that the man should be required to produce another human being. Bring about another entity in the world. Those of us under a parashaft. Then we have to have a special bracha and a special inyan when you Yevorech Oisom Elokim. Let's not get to the ordinary inyan of the chayes of each nefesh b'toicha aguf shaloi. The chayes of the nefesh b'toicha aguf. It functions in the way we described earlier with the whole inyan of bilti toisefes, bilti tzedek lebracha, bilti tzedek b'shum. B'shum Dova. That's the inyan what he says, Ba'atorah she'itroloi imoi. Well, that's the whole inyan brought down. It's written by Shlomo HaMelech in Shir HaShirim. It said, Tzeyu Rei, we said, Surei, B'nai Yerushalayim, Ba'melech Shlomo, Ba'atorah she'itroloi imoi b'yom chasunosai, b'yom simchas liboy. B'yom chasunosai. So the Rebbe brings at the beginning of the famous Hemshech, Samech to Samech, Reim Ahuim, right at the beginning, in that famous Emshel, what he said to Emshel during the Chasna and the Sheva Brachas of the Friedrich Rebbe. He brings over there that today, that there should be the from Lode, that the man should have a koyach of moilid zayin, a zweiter Metzias Gashmis, he should be able to give out of himself, not a goof. He should be noilid, a zweiter Zach. For that you have to have, but Torah she'itru lo imay b'yom chasun. That has to be a special inyan. If Torah means a keser. In other words, there has to be an asinas koyach and l'mayla mikol ha'inyonim directly from the meaning of keser. Yeah, well, that's what we said before. Like Avi Reivish, the Chai v'loiba, but Chaim does it like Avi Hechel from all the inyonim, those achmas, and that gives the ability into the yodim that he should be able to be. How do you call it? He should be able to be moilid a zweiter, yeah, a zweiter Metzias. So that's got nothing to do with here, said the Rebbe. That's a besonder inyan that comes from Achmas saying, say, zero shach le'inyan, and that's what he brings over there. That Chachma and Bina, yeah, they have in themselves two states. They have what we call the Yichud Chitayni Dabor, or we have the Yin from Yichud Pnimi Dabor. Yichud Pnimi Dabor, the Alter brings it in Mekut Teter and Pasha Moya, over there in the famous Maim over there from Mikdashti. The Alter Rebbe Mazba over there, that the Inyan from Yichud Pnimi Dabor is not a Yichud Tamidi, it's not a ständig Gezach, and that's a Buddha that the man shares, like the Alter brings it down here, that the blood is really from the Moyach Adam. Aber es ist nicht von dem Moyach als ein ruchnistischer Inyan, aber das wird jetzt im Gashmis a Moyach Atzmei, and that's a quote, Kidei dos, Uftan Azam in Sotini, and for that you have to have a bracha from Keser, Mamish, that calls a Yichud Pnimi da Avo. In Melaninja, really the Inyan from Yichud Pnimi da Avo is really Shat Gashmi, it's nicht der Ruchni, wein kann machen lahari bezek al kaponim smovu at the beginning of that famous Hemsher. We call mocking muchai be'etchem, kamoken shim jachayes, am tzarawi, upchidash por atzmir. Avo chochas ha'ore lahachiyos, just to give chayes to the group, ene meteisef ali dizeh mu'uma be'etzema, ולכן אין העצם נתפס ומסלביש ביש פשטס האורה שהרי גילה האורה היא בדרך ממילא כמו כל חי מסנניה הרי זה בדרך ממילא שהחי ממילא מסנניה. In other words, he just gives it off, that chayes lachiyos, that ability to move things just goes off from him, but mamilä beli kol tira of his pashtas, I'm sorry, of his taskas, or business with the Indian. And so Be'ez Hashem, that'll be enough for this evening, because we want to try and do Marav on time this evening, because I understand there's going to be a shiur that was based on Bechira, what's one on the famous Diuk, but the Rebbe is Medatik, then why did the Rambam call it was based on Bechira? Oh, that's an unusual word, it's called Hilchus HaMishkan, Hilchus Beis HaMikdash, Hilchus HaMikdash, Mashu Misa said, it was a Beis HaBechira. The name from Bechira comes from Achma saying safe mamish, Yadua. That the name from Bechira is Shaitavki to the Etche. Yadua, that the fact that we have Bechira crops is only from the Amshocha. The Pnim is from Achma saying safe. Ukamavua, in Pasha Moya and Kutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe, over there the Alter Rebbe brings down that the Bechira we have is really the Bechira from Achma saying safe. Those are the Inyan from the Hilchus Beis HaBechira. So I just want to be also more earlier. I was going to do it after Mara, but I want to hold people up. You guys have to be shluchim to give around the how do you call it, the Seirahs. To one or two chevra have been the Seirah that even on the Shabbos, this Shabbos, which will be officially a Shabbos out, meaning that people can leave if they wish. Those who want to stay, then there'll be a whole Seder with a Shir and Siddur and with Tfilah B'Tzibah and everything. Mitzad Diyini V'Noah T'mimim, and I understand that the air conditioner is working now. I still have a Shavuot working, so the Bren it's working rather weakly, but it is working. So you just to make sure that the Nachshon turns on the air conditioner on Shavuot. Told him. And there'll be a whole week from a Seder Masuda on how to call it Shabbos. I feel it'll be a Shabbos out, or would it be a Seder Masuda? And I think that's a very doa Mavurach Vayesa. I give my how do you call it Vayavorach. I give my bracha to that very much. Should be Kavali Hatzlacha, because it's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing that guys will be organised, even if they're having a break. Okay, good, and that should